Well, hello everybody, and happy here in northern Utah, at least snowy, kind of chilly Tuesday afternoon. I know Ashley, you've got about 6 inches of fresh snow up there in Deer Valley. It was a bit of a whopper overnight. I woke up and I was like, "Whoa, what happened?" um, Anyways, really quick, I'm super happy to have Ashley Heather, my friend, here this afternoon with us. I'm going to come around and do a more official introduction of Ashley, but I wanted to welcome everybody here to TechBeat, where leaders learn, innovate, and grow. Quick reminder that we will be doing a Q&A session at the end of this hour, and if you have any questions that are relevant to the topic that we're discussing, feel free to throw those in the chat bot, or the chat, I should say, chat or comments on whatever platform you're joining us from. Ashley and I will do our best to keep an eye on those and to answer questions as we go throughout this hour, or we'll get to all of them towards the end as well. My name is Earl Foote. I am founder, CEO of Nexus IT Consultants. We are an outsourced white glove IT support and cybersecurity services firm based here in northern Utah and servicing a nationwide footprint. Quickly, I want to mention that we do have some other great segments coming up here in the coming weeks. We've got Peter Bookman, the CEO of Guard Dog. It's an AI network cybersecurity tool. He'll be joining me on November 11th, as well as Josh Pitts, CEO of Shred Media, and Rob Harder, Executive Director of Christian Center Park City, will be joining me in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for those announcements. Let's get down to the man of the hour, Mr. Ashley Heather. Ashley has been developing software and marketing solutions for over 25 years. His innovative software solutions have been used to redefine impulse commerce through Shazam and StarStyle, value-based care and wellness through Off the Scale, social marketing through dotbox, and healthy eating from Honest Plate, and much more. Most recently, Ashley has helped co-found Cleared4.org, which is the leading health validation platform used by businesses, schools, and venues to ensure everyone is COVID-free before entering. Clients include Netflix, Coinbase, Yankees Stadium, Madison Square Garden, Live Nation, and City University of New York. Ashley now lives in Park City with his wife and 3 kids after a 20-year tenure in New York City. So Ashley, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here with me this hour.
No, it's great to be here. Even though we've got 6 inches of snow outside, it feels like a warm welcome and a warm group here. So thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, absolutely. So I know, Ashley, our guests probably have detected by now, those that don't know you, that you have a bit of an accent there. And I know you grew up in the UK. Tell us a little bit about your life journey. How did you go from growing up in the UK to ending up in New York and now here in Park City? And I want to talk a little bit more about the entrepreneurial journey as well. But let's start there with the life journey.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Earl. So I had one of those unusual growing up where I moved around a lot. My dad worked at Caterpillar, the big engineering truck company. And so originally I was born in London, but moved very quickly into Versailles when I was 3 months old. So I lived in France, near Paris till I was 4. So spoke French as my first language, and then got moved from Versailles, which is a very, kind of very French, sexy, fabulous place, to Peoria, Illinois, of all places, which is, Caterpillar Central. And so moved there as a boy from 4 till 7. And so moved around a bunch, and obviously at the time was probably, suffered from that, not an easy thing, making friends and moving and all those things, and then moved back to England and lived there, for some time and studied there, went to school there, college, and then moved to London to work. And, I think that kind of growing up and that forcing change always kind of opened me up as, whether it was the 2 languages or whether it was just the moving around, just always had a desire for travel and wanting to try new things. So moved to London, started with a company called Ford Credit, the bank of Ford, the car company. I loved 2 things at the time. I loved cars and I loved, money, or at least was interested in money. And so that kind of combined my 2 passions. I did economics at college, but I'd been a computer game developer with my brother, who's a little older, since the age of 13. He and I wrote computer games, or I would do the graphics and the business and some of the coding. He would do the majority of the coding, and we launched those and sold them quite successfully, kind of as a teenager. So always been around technology and doing new things and building things, and moved to London, had a great time at Ford. But it's a very staid business. You go down these tracks and you have to do this for a year and then do this for a year. And there's no sense of kind of branching out. And so after 3 years there, really my skill set was between technology and business, right? I understood code, I could develop, but I was often close to business people who didn't understand code because they were older or hadn't had the experience. And my role was really, managing, sitting in between those 2 sides of the world. And so ended up joining a management consulting company in London that was set up by a couple of Accenture partners and focused really on call centers in the early days of call centers, and then web commerce, and then mobile commerce as it was starting to come about in sort of 98, 99. So kind of wanted to do an incubator, came to demo in California, big conference back then. I think it was either 99 or 2000. Everybody was showing up in Ferraris, and, it was like, wow, what is this craziness? I want to, we should replicate that. Went back to the UK and tried to persuade my management consulting company to launch an incubator, an accelerator, kind of doing some of the stuff with tech startups back in the UK. And they said, great idea. Here you go. Here's a space. Here's a room. Here's some team. Here's doubling your salary. Go at it. And I said, I don't want any of that stuff really. I want a piece of it. I want to own a piece of this thing, this new thing that we're creating. And the 2 founders wanted to own 100% of the company and didn't want to share it. And so that was it. I got on a plane. I put $20,000 in my bank account and flew to New York and said, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur in the US. That's where it's all happening. And that was 1 week before September 11th of all timings. Arrived in New York, didn't know anybody really, just, rented a little tiny room in a Upper West Side in New York, and started to network. And 9/11 happened, and I guess decided to stay there. It was a kind of a pivotal moment. My family and friends wanted me to come back, and I was like, no, I'm here for a reason. And it was a great time for startups, in fact, because if, for those maybe you had some, East Coast understanding of that time, or were around that area or had friends there, you couldn't really go anywhere or do anything. You were sort of locked down, but technology was there. You're online on the internet, and resources were relatively inexpensive because people, a lot of people were out of jobs or looking for things to do. And it was kind of a good time to start. And that's where the idea for Shazam kind of came, because I was hearing all this new music. I'd moved to a new town, a new country, and I'd already done a lot of mobile technology stuff in the UK with weather services and location-based technology. And I knew how all that worked. And I was like, hey, there's got to be a way to kind of interact with this music. And using my cell phone to kind of do that, dial a 1-800 number. And so that's how it started. It was a 1-800 number. And we actually drove you to record stores. So we created a wireless iPad before iPads existed. It was based on the iPad, the compact iPad, for those that remember. And it had a wireless sled, and we wrapped it in kind of a neoprene coating. It had headphones, and you could tag songs with 1-800 number and then walk into Tower Records or Virgin and pick up one of these devices, move around the store, scan a barcode of a CD. It would tell you what CD, because this was all, it wasn't track-based at the time. This is all album-based music. And hey, here's the track you've tagged on your phone. Well, here's the album that it's on, and go and listen to the album. Do you want to buy it? So we licensed that technology to Tower Records. I got to meet Richard Branson. We launched it in Virgin. I met Bill Gates through a Microsoft partnership we had with that same technology company. So just an amazing time for me. I was in my late 20s doing some great things. And then the whole record store business disappeared, overnight. iTunes launched, track-based, and, that business kind of evolved. And that was kind of the start of my entrepreneurship. I could keep going. There's a lot more, but that was kind of the start of my entrepreneurship.
This is so fascinating, actually. Seriously, so interesting to see just how much you've kind of been all over, the world really, and how that journey has shaped you as an individual and as an entrepreneur. I'm always fascinated by people that, first of all, Europeans that always, speak more than one language, which is really cool, right? In my opinion. And something that oftentimes we don't see in the United States nearly as often as we should. And certainly, it seems like outside of the U.S. and particularly outside of Utah, a lot of the populace is far more willing to kind of just go try things out, right? Go to other places, be a stranger in a foreign land, right? And just kind of throw everything out there and see what comes of it, right? And so, a really cool, entrepreneurial journey. I'm really interested. It's been very interesting to hear this. So, with Shazam, obviously that's a massive platform that we're all very aware of, right? And I like it because particularly like the older songs that I forget about from the 70s and 80s, when they come on, I'm like, oh wait, what's that? So I open up Shazam and it tells me, about what the track is and all that kind of stuff, and kind of have these moments of reminiscence, when you first heard that, or how that played a role in your life when you were a budding kid or a teenager. So what was your initial kind of role with Shazam? How did that all start out?
So when I moved to the States that first time, I had this idea. And so I hired an MIT guy to build the algorithms. And we started off, we called it Music Cube. So it was this device that you had in record stores, and it was a 1-800 number. And so it was called Music Cube, 411 song. So it was 1-800-411 song was the 1-800 number. And Shazam didn't exist at the time. And then what happened was an American called Chris Barton left the US almost the same month that I come to the States, and went to the UK. And he technically started Shazam, the company that's now known as Shazam, and basically created a similar platform, but didn't have a track level metadatabase, which is what we had sort of built. And so we combined and did some deals and kind of combined. And I fell out of love after a year or two with the overall business. It wasn't making any money. Ultimately, it got bought by Apple 18 years later for $400 million. But I went on from that to launch. So when I talk about kind of, I forget how I described it in the bio, but kind of interacting with making life buyable is kind of the phrase that I've used, which is I hear something, how do I buy it? So I moved on to the next one, which is I see something, how do I buy it? So in 2004, I launched StarStyle with some other founders, and that was tagging basically TV shows with everything you saw, because the music experience was, how can I make money taking a fraction of a 99-cent purchase, right? You have to make billions and billions of those. Like it just seems so unlikely to become a real business. But if you take that concept of impulse purchase and look at products, then, they're $50 or $100 or $200, depending on what the product is. Looking at your guitars behind you, fine guitars on your wall, they're probably, $1,000. So if you can take a slice of that, then it's a much bigger number. And so raised some venture capital and launched that business and did about 50 different shows. American Idol was the biggest show we did. So we actually tracked all of the products the kids were wearing live on stage as they walked out on stage, whether it was jewelry, fashion, their shoes. We did As the World Turns, their studio sets. We did Simple Life with Paris Hilton. I lived in LA for 2 years and did all these great shows. We did music videos, really, really cool business. Similar technology in the sense that empowering consumers to interact with what they're seeing and then act on impulse, tag, share, buy. And that was 2004. So 2004, 5, 6. Then Facebook launched around that time. And it's very complicated. The world of the music business and the TV business, there's lots of people in it. You've got a production network who makes the show. You've got a broadcast network who monetizes the show. So you've got Fox, for example. You've got 19, which owns American Idol. Then you have the talent themselves. You have the stylists you need to work with to get the information on what's being purchased. And you got all these fingers in the pie and all trying to they've all got competing agendas. And so it was just a very difficult model to scale holistically. And then you have all the brands and the retailers that you then have to do deals with to get paid on all this stuff. And so, we built this very big 5 million SKU database and went through that whole process. And it was a great time. But ultimately, the crash came in 2008. The VCs pulled all their money out, and I was kind of back out on the street, so to speak, ready for my next adventure.
Yeah. Man, that sounds like it was way ahead of its time too,
15 years too. I mean, nobody solved it now. It's $1 billion business and $1 billion opportunity. It's just cracking the nut. We filed patents back in 2005 for cameras that would read Bluetooth sensors or sensors in clothing and products to know what they were. So as the content was being filmed, that metadata stream would be added as a layer in 2005. That's
wow.
16 years ago. We filed those patents. And it's still not, it's still years and years from happenings.
Yeah. I still see on occasion, startups trying to do something similar, right? But it doesn't seem that anybody's really necessarily figured out that equation yet. And certainly on the web, you see that. You see, now that you can click on whatever, content you're working with, right? Through certain platforms, and you're taken to the ability to be able to buy that, right? But through TV, it just doesn't happen right now. So that's
I created this word which is not got into the lexicon like Google, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would be a billionaire. But it's called plinking, product linking. And so I was in Fast Company, and it was all the word of the week or month or whatever, it's plinking. So it was like a rifle shot, like that's the thing I want, like a targeted thing, and then it's a product link or a plink. And so we wanted that to become in the lexicon of I should be able to plink everything, right? We launched on Facebook just before the company was kind of pulled the plug in 08. 15 million photos a day were being uploaded to Facebook, and we were like, oh well, look at all that media. Let's pivot the platform and take it to user generated content instead of Hollywood generated content, and allow people to plink their own basically images, so that if you saw something your buddy was wearing or whatever, you could click on it. So we launched that in 2008. Plink, we were almost the first app on Facebook when Facebook allowed apps in that whole world. I mean, it's all changes the platform, but early days. So I always call it bleeding edge, right? So I've lived in that bleeding edge of the world where it's a great idea, but just either before its time or you don't quite have the resources to make it work. And I think that's the sign of a great entrepreneur, knowing the difference between bleeding edge and leading edge, and knowing, timing is so much part of success. And it's not about skill or talent or knowledge or whatever. It's luck and timing of that, hitting that wave. Just, you've got to be early enough to have an edge, but not too early that you're bled to death because you're just, funding a non-revenue business for too long.
Yeah. So fascinating, really. And what you've seen and done in your career really is quite extraordinary, Ashley. So I want to get down a little bit to kind of the topic of the hour.
Yeah, sure.
We wanted to talk about this concept of, start a business in 10 days. Yep. Go from your napkin scratches to actually, rolling out some sort of product or service or offering in 10 days and potentially being in revenue, right? And then we're going to talk about going beyond that. But for a lot of people, this concept is a little, it's a little out there, right? They're like, wait a second, like how am I going to possibly go from an idea to having a business that is operating in 10 days? So tell us a little bit about your mentality around, the ultra fast kind of startup, and what you've learned in the process.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use a couple of examples here, and there's a tech business which is in the tech world, but I'm going to start with a couple of examples that I'm still involved with non-tech businesses, where I think as an entrepreneur you think big, right? You always think, hey, here's the problem I'm going to solve, and it's going to be this big success and a big business, and so I need a lot of things. I need a lot of capital. I need a lot of resources. I need a lot to get started, right? And I think I was one of those people. And I had this idea when I moved from New York City to Long Island about 10 years ago to start kind of a WeWork type concept back in this region called the Hamptons. It's kind of a resort town, and there's a few entrepreneurs like me there, but not a lot of people. And I was like, hey, I want to create a place for people to connect. I want a WeWork type environment. I want this cool building. I want it to have all these facilities and networking and offices and a restaurant and all this stuff. And it's going to be awesome. So I built a big business plan and, needed $8 million, raise $8 million to kind of buy a building and renovate a building and all this stuff. This is, I guess, 2012, 13 kind of time. And I just kept hitting these brick walls, like, it's, well, you got, it's chicken and egg, right? Well, you got to solve all these questions first before people will believe in it and put the money in it and so forth. And eventually this guy said, well, look, let's layer this business, like take it down to its core essence. Like, what is the core essence of this thing? Forget all the fancy building and all the stuff and bring it down to its core. Well, it's getting great people together. All right, well, that's the core thing. And then putting a business around that, right? So how do you do that? How do you do that quickly and easily? How do you prove, what's the MVP without raising $8 million? What's the MVP for this thing? And I'm at this diner in Southampton having this conversation with the owner of the diner across the bar. And I'm like, you're so right. You're like, why am I trying to raise $8 million and do this thing? It's like, okay, so how are we going to start this thing? He said, well, my buddy owns a bar and the bar's closed down in the off season. And this was, kind of winter, it was, October, November time. And he's like, I'm sure he'd give you his bar just to kind of run the thing out of the bar in the off season. And here's his number, and called him the next day. And within a week, I'd got a rental furniture company to come in. We'd taken all the furniture out. We'd put in cool lounge furniture in this bar, and the Spur is the name of it, which is funny because Park City is the only other place in the country that has something called the Spur. Named it the Spur because it was next to this railroad. It was kind of the off track, right? The spur of a railroad is kind of the track that an entrepreneur would take, as it were. So we called it the Spur, and we were up in business in 10 days, right? We literally had a 3,000 square foot space with cool furniture in it at no cost, basically no cost, because it was like, hey, that's cool. I want to be part of that. I want to make it happen. And, put a website up on WordPress or whatever it was, and had a friend of mine who was a graphics person, did a little homepage, and that was it. And that was a business, and boom. And then launched that, and within 90 days had a term sheet for $8 million to launch the 15,000 square foot building. But if it hadn't started with that, I would still probably be knocking on doors looking for the $8 million, because I think we as entrepreneurs create these barriers, these self-imposed barriers of what this thing is or what it has to be, that stop us really getting to the nitty-gritty of what's the unique value, who are the customers, how do I get them together, how do I prove, what's my MVP for this concept? MVP is a term used a lot now, but 10 years ago it wasn't really the terminology. And so that was that was that business. Now COVID unfortunately basically killed that business, and whilst it kind of pseudo exists, it's not necessarily yet what I want it to be, although it's still something that I'm kind of working on the side to bring that concept to resort towns. And Earl, you'll understand that being here in Park City, like where is that physical epicenter for work, play, and having fun and so forth. So yeah. So that's an example that's kind of non-tech related. And I think Cleared4, we could talk a little bit about that. This isn't a big advert for Cleared4 or whatever, but Cleared4 is a similar story where it was a pivot from, I had a medical technical platform that I'd built with a doctor, and he was an ER doc. He'd ran an ER in New York City for 20 years, and he wanted to reduce the lines and the wait times in an ER. So 83% of people come to an ER do not need to be there. How do we stop this? So we created this app, which was really his brain. And it was a bunch of questions. It was a self-triage thing you used at home. You answered the questions, and it said, yeah, go to the ER, don't go to the ER, go to the specialist, go, blah, 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 right? It's kind of a triage app. And we built this. Again, we were banging on doors, trying to kind of create a business model, realized that ERs actually want all those people there, which is the horrible thing about the American health system, unfortunately, is that, the hospitals did not want a system that reduced the number of people in the ER. They actually, unfortunately want to do more surgeries, more stuff, because that's how the business of health works. So we were banging our heads, and then COVID hit. And we're in the middle of that kind of journey. And we sat, this is December time when COVID was just in China or whatever, and just sort of early time, and said, look, well, if this comes here, how are people going to tell the difference between the flu and COVID? And we had this app that was basically telling you, it had 50 conditions. It wasn't just about the flu, it was all these things. So we branched off a bit of that code. We called it Flu Checker. And again, within a couple of days, put up a website, called it Flu Checker, and was like, hey, companies, if your person thinks they got the flu and they want to know whether they got COVID, answer these 12 questions and we'll basically tell you if you have COVID or not. And it kind of took off very quickly and then became Cleared4, which is now an end-to-end platform with vaccine management and testing and all that kind of stuff. But it was just a very, a little pivot. It didn't need a lot of time and energy. I think if you talk to enough people quickly about the idea and the value proposition you're trying to create, the network effect of today's world allows it to accelerate quickly and get out there. So long as you're in a white space, white space being like a blank page, like an opportunity space, it can scale very, very quickly. But anyway, we can talk about Cleared4. So I think, the concept of 0 to 10 it can be starting from scratch the piece of paper, or it can be a pivot from something you're already doing where you take a fraction of it and just move it into a different direction. And that, that kind of change is enough to kind of get you started. So lots of different ways we can attack the question, but that's just some experiences to share.
Yeah. So many great points there, really, Ashley. And you're so right that very often entrepreneurs have this idea, they have a dream, right? And they see like this massively developed offering out there, right? And they feel like that's what they have to build to start out, right? And the reality is that you don't have to. My entire career, I've been a grassroots kind of guy, and I've been a guy who's never gone and raised capital. Now, I'm not going to be an advocate that that's the right thing to do, right? There are pros to it and there are cons to it, right? But I've always had grassroots startups, and I've always been, all my ventures have always been self-funded. And certainly always look for what is my quickest path to putting an offering out there that resonates with the market, and my quickest path to getting revenue off of that, right? And sometimes, that is literally a matter of days and a matter of a few $1,000s maybe, right? Maybe you just need, a lawyer to drop the paperwork for the business. You need a website. And you need to start hitting the pavement, right? And getting out there and talking to people about it. And certainly there are situations, say a service-based business, where that is far easier, right? If you're talking product, if you're talking software, you already, in Cleared4, you already had a piece of software that you rekeyed and pivoted right into what is the Cleared4 offering. So, but authoring that software, developing it from ground up, of course, is probably not a 10-day process. Getting an MVP, which for the audience, I'm sure, we have a savvy audience, but, MVP is minimal viable product, right? What's the most basic thing you can put out there? The market's going to go, oh, hey, like that's kind of cool. And I'm going to actually pay some money for that. Right. It really is fascinating. And I see that sort of error all the time. I'm relatively connected in the startup communities here in Utah. I like to be involved with them because I love the energy. I love to see the ideas, the innovation. It certainly helps me as well, to kind of get the gears rolling and think about how we innovate more within our business. And I just like to support what's happening in our communities. There wasn't a lot of startup communities here really in Utah when I started my business 23 years ago. And so, being able to lend a hand to budding startups, is something I enjoy. But one of the biggest things that I see is that they feel like they've got to spend 2 or 3 years in development, right? And they've got to have this ultra refined kind of perfect offering before they actually go to market with it. And it's a massive error in most situations. I've been reading or listening to the book Masters of Scale, which I'm just wrapping up. And of course that has spawned out of a podcast of the same title, but that is particularly one of the principles of the book is like, you just need to figure out your MVP, figure out, your initial offering and get it out there as quickly as possible. And if you're not embarrassed by your initial offering, you've probably done something. You've probably waited too long. You've probably done something something wrong. And that's, look, and it's so interesting to watch or to kind of listen to the case studies in this book of Masters of Scale of the major startups that we know, or the major tech businesses that we know of today, the Facebooks of the world, Twitter, eBay, PayPal, Google, and how it follows those stories, and how all of them kind of really got that. They just found something quick and easy. They went for it. They poured their heart and soul into it. And then they quickly kind of developed it from there based upon very productive, user feedback loops that they generated within those platforms. So
I think you're the best at one thing initially, right? I think the other startup thing is you take lots of bits of ideas and say, oh, I want to combine all of that into this thing. And that's the vision, is the connection of all these little things. And that's hard to do, because then it needs a lot of engineering and but if you can find that white space and that small thing, that you can be better than even a company trying to do something similar, but they're not doing exactly this. So be the best at that, better than anybody else for at least the first part of your journey. And then you can spiral out and add more and add more and add more, but pick what you're going to be best at. And I always say there's a few different models I've used. There's this thing called the business model canvas. You can Google it. It's a free framework. That's business model canvas, 3 words. And that basically lets you put your idea on one piece of paper. So people say, oh, do I need to write a business plan? No. On one piece of paper, the business model canvas allows you to start in the middle with your value proposition, how you're going to take it to market, who your customers are, channel partners, direct, etc., what resources you need to make that happen, and then your costs of doing it and your revenue model, all on one piece of paper. And if you can synthesize that, and then make sure you've spoken to at least 100 people about your value proposition to see, is it a real problem that you're trying to solve, right? There may be a problem that 1% of the universe has, or 0.5% of 1%, or, what is that problem you're trying to solve? And then finally, what is your unfair advantage in solving that problem? And you have to have an unfair advantage, because if you don't, you will not succeed. It doesn't matter how skilled you are, except that if your exceptional skill is your unfair advantage, then that is your unfair advantage. But rarely is that the case. In today's kind of skilled workforce. So really understanding not just the problem you want to solve, but why are you going to be better at solving that problem than anybody else? And it might be access to resources. It might be some insight you have. It might be your intellect. It might be a relationship you have. It might be lots of different, your unfair advantage might be different things. But you have to really mine it and use that to get to your MVP. And then you can build fences around and barriers and, build your business and grow it and defend against all the competition as you scale. But knowing the problem you're trying to solve and what your unfair advantage is. And then not a final catchphrase, but another catchphrase, part of moving around the world, I say you've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. It is an uncomfortable world out there. The world was not designed to be nice to you. It is not generally a nice place to be on a day-to-day basis. There's, a lot of things you have to deal with, and weather and traffic and emotions and, lots of things, in people's lives, a lot of stress. And so you have to learn, especially if you want to be an entrepreneur or a successful entrepreneur, you have to learn the ability to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's what I was lucky enough to be exposed to as a kid, moving around a bunch and countries and places and houses and schools and new best friends and all that stuff was just building that resilience so that you're not afraid to put something embarrassing out there and be okay with the learning journey that you're going to have, and that learning agenda to get that feedback loop and to iterate and iterate and iterate, rather than being told, no, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect. And that's, if that's the way that you've been brought up around, it's very difficult to step outside of that. If you've been very successful at maybe your non-entrepreneurial career, and that's kind of then your DNA, and then stepping out of that into an entrepreneurial career, you have to, it's a different world. So it's been fascinating. Lots of ups and downs.
Yeah, I want to key in on this. This is another thing that I really see is super common with startups, and that is that so often they don't look for what you've referred to as the white space, right? They don't look for an unaddressed market or an unaddressed problem, right? I see, for example, like you see those juice bars in the strip malls that, like, 6 of them have gone out of business in the same exact location in the same strip mall over the last 10 years. But 3 months after they go out of business, another one's going to pop up in that exact same locale, right? And you look at those entrepreneurs and you think, what what are you thinking? Like really, if 6 of these businesses in that same, these same exact businesses in that same strip mall have gone out of business in the last 10 years, why do you think you're going to be different, right? And so it's super common that I see, startups come up with an idea that really is not unique. It's an idea that somebody else somewhere else is already addressing. And oftentimes, there's massive amounts of competition. And look, I certainly can't profess to be, the absolute expert here, because I have massive amounts of competition in my own, my own business and my own field. However, we look for some very distinct ways to distinguish ourselves and our offerings from, the status quo or the norm out there. But this idea of, in fact, if you read the book, Crossing the Chasm, it's an old book. The use cases in the book are old, right? But they're still very applicable. And one of the big principles there is choosing your beachhead, right? You got to find like that first initial piece of ground that that piece of the market that you can land and you can dominate. And so, it's so important what you've expressed there, Ashley, that you need to find what is my unfair advantage? What can I do better than anybody else? And maybe that's a matter of skill. Maybe it's a matter of knowledge. Maybe it's a matter of, capabilities of a team or capabilities of a technology or, or product that you've developed or something, right? But what is my unfair advantage? How can I use that to land a market segment that resonates with? And then how can I iterate from there and, and evolve and grow this thing? And I just got to say that being uncomfortable, learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable as an entrepreneur or a leader in any capacity is an absolute must. You are going to be stretched day in and day out. You're constantly going to be outside your comfort zone. It's not, there are rarely days as an entrepreneur or a leader where you can just kind of sit back and go, oh, this is kind of easy. We got this thing in the bag, right? Pretty much every single day, there's going to be new challenges. And sometimes those challenges are the people, that you work with and deal with. Sometimes they're money. Sometimes it's the amount of time that you have. Sometimes it's, the market shifting. In today's world, the market shifts so quickly, right? And trying to stay on top of that and actually even see before it comes, right? And prepare for it is insanely challenging. So most definitely, get comfortable with being uncomfortable is an extremely important piece of this equation.
I think if you've got time for, one of the kind of content, and these are just, things I've learned and changed and how I've evolved from a 20-year-old to a, mid 40-year-old, as it were, in this entrepreneur journey, is you've really got to do yourself out of a job, which sounds crazy, right? So my job is to do myself out of my job, but that's real. Once you've done the beachhead and you've done that and you've kind of got a bit of a team and so forth, that's phase one. But phase two is you got to do yourself out of the job, because if you keep doing the job and you're the only person who can do that thing, you've only got maximum 18 hours of a day. Although I did a 36-hour workday like this week, unfortunately, but generally you've got like 18 hours of a day that you can be working on. And there's, if you have to be involved in the process all the time, so you're, as an entrepreneur, the exit is you have to stop doing it. It has to run by itself. And then when it runs by itself, you can take on the next challenge. You can open your eyes and take another beachhead, or you can add this or grow this or whatever. But if you are the center of the wheel, and, ego drives a lot of this, especially if you're an entrepreneur, and you need ego, because ego is what breaks you out and kind of moves you forward in some ways. But the negative of that ego is by having to be in the middle, you're stopping the flywheel going, and you're stopping that exponential growth. And you always need to have your heads up, like driving a car, right? You got to be looking 20 feet ahead, not kind of right down in front of you. And if you're the one doing the 18 hours a day on the doing of the doing, then you're not going to be looking at, that 20 feet. So I think once you've got your beachhead and you've got your initial thing, then the next challenge, and it's not easy, is taking yourself out of the business so that you can layer on another piece of the business that doesn't mean that you're spending 18 hours a day on the current business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I know the saying is cliche, but the saying of stop working in the business and start working on the business, comes to mind. And one of the lessons I had to learn early on in my career, I'm a perfectionist. I like things to be just the way that they should be, right? And that led me to be a bit of a micromanager early on in my career. But I had to learn really quick that micromanagers will bottleneck a business, and you will stifle that business. You will not allow it to grow. You've got to ultimately put process, procedure, systems in place, but also you've got to put people and culture in place that you can trust, you can empower them, and you can let them run with it, right? And ultimately, if you can find entrepreneurs, people who have vision of what they want to create within the organization, even better, right? And then you can hand those reins over to them. And like you said, you can move on and look for, okay, what's our next beachhead, right? What's the next product development we need to have? What's the vision here? Where are we going over the next 5 years or 10 years? And what's our roadmap to get there, and all that kind of stuff, right? All that strategy. And then you can work on culture and those things that really lend to, a company being successful. Really, really, really important stuff here. So one of the things that I know you had mentioned is building in some, particularly in younger startups, building in some really robust feedback loops with your clients. Tell us a little bit about your experience and your approach to that and why you feel like it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, obviously, the clients are paying the money, and as an entrepreneur, you have the idea, and often it's ahead of its time, and so you might be thinking of problems or things that your clients aren't yet thinking of, or you started the journey so quickly with your MVP that it's really your clients that are going to evolve the product lifecycle for your business, right? And your feature set and what's coming up next, and it's really linking from that beachhead to the next idea. That's why the client feedback is so important. Listening to them and having regular feedback. So for Cleared4, that means that every 2 weeks we invite all of our clients into a bi-weekly or bi-monthly session where here's the product roadmap. It's almost transparent. It's like, here's what we're doing, here's what we're building, what do you need, and get that feedback loop. And we get many of our best ideas on what we need to do. And we're in the weekly release cycle kind of world, which is very rapid for a development cycle, to stay ahead of the competition and just to stay up with COVID, which is a very fast evolving world that we're in. And so that we couldn't do it without that customer feedback. And I think, entrepreneurs often feel, that they have all the answers and they have, they know what this thing is. And sometimes it's true, but sometimes you're too far, again, that bleeding edge, you're too far ahead and you're solving a problem that's not quite relevant yet. So I think if you're at the stage where you haven't started yet and you have the idea, talking to as many likely customers as possible, friends, family, uncles, aunts, friends of friends, whatever, and going, hey, I'm trying to do this. And if you think that by sharing the idea you're giving it away, it's not going to be a business. So don't worry about talking to people about this thing that you're trying to create. Don't go into that whole world of, I've got to patent it and all that. Most businesses do not survive because of a patent. Most businesses survive because client relationships, good technology, good teams, good culture, all of that stuff. None of that is patentable. So talk to as many people as you can in the early stage if you're building that business model canvas, that value proposition. And if your customers are HR managers in healthcare, then make sure you've talked to 100 HR managers in healthcare as best you can, or at least as close to it, and try and iterate that, because that's in the startup process. But then don't stop doing that. Like, it's just a constant, you have to build it into the business, in having these feedback loops from your clients, whether it's, and human touch is much better. Yes, you can automate when you're at scale and all that great stuff. You can automate customer surveys and blah, blah, blah. But you're not, we're talking about startup. Startup is, it's you and a few people around you. You are the company, you're the culture, you're the idea. Customers, be as social as you can, learn from them, involve them, but explain and say, look, I'm bringing you in early. I'm giving you a discount. You're getting this for free or whatever it is. So there's some exchange of value and you're not just abusing the relationship. And you will find some people who come in and really help you for free, which is, what you need as a startup, to move from alpha to beta or, somewhere on that journey. So I think it's people for some reason in the entrepreneurial world don't want to talk. I mean, they like talking about their idea to other entrepreneurs, but they don't want to get out there. And it's either because they're afraid that when they talk to a customer, the customer goes, what the hell are you talking about? That's a ridiculous idea, right? or that they're trying to protect it because it's so private and so secret and so whatever that they can't talk to anybody about it. But if you're going down those roads with that attitude, you're unlikely, not necessarily impossible, but you're less likely to succeed without going with that sort of open mind and that iterative loop.
Yeah, and I don't mean to continually quote kind of the same book or bring up the ideas from the same book, but because it's all fresh in my mind, this Masters of Scale again. One of the concepts there, particularly for startups, is early on do things that don't scale, right? So often entrepreneurs think that everything that you build in a business has to be able to scale at massive pace, and yes, that's important, right? But you also, particularly when you're starting out, and particularly when it comes to these feedback loops, you need to do things that are not scalable. So, for example, they talk about Airbnb and how Airbnb, started in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and initially they didn't get a ton of traction, but they found that in this small little market in New York, they were getting quite a bit of traction. They had, they had a few dozen loyalists, that were early adopters of the platform and really seemed to be loving it and using it. And so the Airbnb founding team got on a plane, they booked nights with all of these users of their platform, and they went out, and stayed with those users, and then went through the platform with them and what's working, what's not working, what would you like to see, what improvements can we do, what are the pros, what are the cons, and kind of went through this whole process with them. And that really developed into, a lot of what we see as today's modern Airbnb platform, right? And that's the important thing. We talked about this, choose your MVP and then iterate, right? And in order to iterate, you really need to be paying attention to the way that your clients use and want to use, and the value that they're extrapolating from your offering, right? The other, interesting thing that this book, Masters of Scale, talks about is that so many of these very successful tech giants in today's world figured out how not to just have written or verbal feedback loops from their clients, but to actually be able to observe the way that their clients use their products, right? And how important that is, because so often the consumers, what the consumer will express in the way that they think that they want to use the product and the value that they get from the product is actually very, very different in the way that they actually use the product and what is actually important to them. And so if you can figure out ways to observe your clientele, utilizing your offering, right? And then key in on common themes there of what's really, adding value for them, then you can figure out how to iterate and improve your product from there, right? Super cool, idea here. So tell me about, I know, you told me a little bit that in some of your startups, you maybe had too many cooks in the kitchen, and that can lead to be, sort of a catastrophic scenario. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think it's a balance when you're founding a company, right? If you're a first-time entrepreneur, generally you're not doing it alone. You've got a buddy or two buddies or three buddies, whatever, who are all starting the company together, and somebody's good at one thing and somebody's good at another thing, and it's all exciting, and you're like, okay, let's divvy up this thing 25, 25, 25, whatever it is. You've all got equal shares, and because that whole partnership and equality is often very important when you're starting a company. But then you get into it and you realize that companies go through different life cycles of needing different types of skill sets, whether it's the drive, the culture setting, the technology expertise, and whatever. And so I think that's one of the hardest things, and I'm still learning through it. Generally I've had a business partner or two in most of my entrepreneurial journeys, because sometimes you need somebody. It's lonely at the top. You need somebody to talk to, bounce ideas off, and, share the stress with. But then, the risk reward doesn't seem, sort of falls out of balance, right? You're doing more than the other person, or the other people's skills aren't now needed moving forward in the company. But of course, again, ego comes back into it. We all have ego as human beings, and that ego for that person is like, well, I'm feeling left out now, and I want to challenge things or do things to make attention because I'm a quarter owner and I should have a say and all the rest of it. But hey, you've got no experience in this area, and we've kind of moved on to the next part of this business and matured. And you see that in the press with founders and Facebook and Microsoft and Apple, all this stuff, right? So there's this iteration of who's right at the kind of the time of the company. And so it's kind of funny the way I describe myself. So if you got the A to Z of building a company, so the A is the piece of paper, the idea, the spark, the kernel, and then Z is going public, which most people think is the success, right? I've $1 billion gone public, and that's your A to Z. Then so I'm Ashley Heather, right? So I'm A to H. So my life journey so far has been A to H on that roadmap, where I've taken things from the piece of paper and are very comfortable living in that uncomfortable world, getting it to the point where right now we're a 15 million AAR company, which is reasonable, maybe 100 million in value. That's, to a lot of people, that's, oh my God, that's life, wealth, and as successful you can be. But in today's tech world, if you don't have a BN in front of your valuation, then you haven't really achieved much. So it's figuring out, are you the A to H, and that's where your skills are, and know that. So when you're approaching the K and the H in that area, like, okay, I've got to bring in the next team, person, whatever. And I realize that I'm going to jettison out now, and I'm going to go back to the A and start that journey again. And that's one way to think about it. Or the other way to think about it is, no, I'm going to evolve now. I'm going to, instead of being an A to H person, I'm now going to be an E to a S, right? And I'm going to expand what I'm comfortable with, and I'm going to take it on to that kind of next level. I mean, there's very few founders, Mark Zuckerberg obviously is one of them, but very few who are A to Z people, right, in their life. They can truly start with the idea and the nugget, and then still be involved at the leadership level all the way after that kind of Z process. And so know yourself, know who your founders are, have these conversations in the early days of saying, well, here's the spectrum. Where are your skills? And are we complementing each other? Are we all the same? And really kind of get a good makeup of team members, not just from their skills, marketing, technology, whatever, but kind of how they're approaching life and they see success. And then you're more likely to create a great team, at the right point in the journey for you.
So important, really, and really most smart founders know when to step aside, when to know that they've reached their point of limitation. Not that, entrepreneurs can't learn, and they should. Most of us have to learn like at a very rapid pace. It's drinking through a fire hose all the time, right? You can learn, you can figure out how to evolve, but oftentimes that process will slow the business in significant manners, right? Where you can bring other people in who have taken it, from K to M or whatever, right? So knowing when to kind of say, okay, I've had my day in the sun. It's time for me to bring in, other people who have had more experience with this. It's important, as you mentioned from the beginning, if you have co-founders, I would recommend making sure you have very specific delineation of roles. That will help with the too many cooks in the kitchen kind of thing, right? So, make sure that the guy or the gal that is, most versed on finances, that's the person who's, over accounting and finance and that CFO role, right? And the person who's, best at operations, they're going to be over operations. The person who's good at vision and culture and ideation, that's probably the CEO. And particularly if they're good at, if they're good at being an evangelist and selling the product and service, right? And so, having a specific delineation so that, you don't have the finance person trying to run operations while there's already somebody there that's supposed to be running the operations, right? An interesting story, a mutual friend of ours, Bassam Salem, he's a guy who would take, businesses as the COO from 10 million in revenue to about 100 million in revenue. And he did that multiple different times in his career. And then he stepped aside from that and decided he wanted to be an executive coach, a founding coach. And as he started that process, he realized that he felt kind of like a hypocrite because he'd never built a business from 0 to 10, right? And so that's what, our friend has been doing the last 5 years. He decided, I'm going to go prove to myself that I can actually build a business from 0 to 10, so that I can actually coach people through the entire journey, right? And so, he built our Atlas RTX. It's a chatbot technology, cool company. And it's interesting to see, that he realized that, okay, so he wasn't an A to H guy like Ashley Heather. He was maybe an H to like a, who knows, a P or something, right? Kind of guy. And he's like, well, I need to obtain that A to H skill set and knowledge, right? I just think it's super inspiring and super cool. So, Ashley, we've got a couple of just a few minutes left here, about 5 minutes left. Actually, there was a user who asked, what was the white page site to lay out your idea, the one-page ideation thing?
Yeah, it's called Business Model Canvas. You can just Google it, Business Model Canvas, and just look at images or whatever, and you can download. Make sure you don't pay for it anywhere. There's plenty of places you can get it for free. And there's basically a one-pager, which is like a graphical, the idea in the middle and some boxes. It's got about 10 boxes on it. And then there's a longer document, maybe a 10-page document that kind of describes each of those boxes and what goes in it. But essentially, the value proposition, your route to market, how you're going to get to your customers, what you need, what resources you need, your business model. So what are you spending money on? How are you charging for it? And kind of all of that on one page. And I think the challenge for the entrepreneur is the getting it. If you can't describe it on one page, you're not creating an MVP, right? You're going too big, with too complex. It's too many moving pieces. Too many moving pieces. The beauty of that model is just it lets you really try and get to that core. So a bit like that story I told you about the Spur when I wanted this, $8 million. Like I had a business plan for that, 30 pages, all this stuff. But yet, I didn't know the business model canvas at the time, but if I'd done it, it would have been connecting great people together would be the value proposition, right? That's it. Connecting great people together in resort towns. Okay, great. I can visualize that. I see that. How are you going to charge for it? It's membership. Great. $100 a month, whatever it is, right? What do I need? Well, I need a space. Okay, well, great. I got a buddy who's got a space, whatever. Like if you can kind of get it down to that core stuff, and then obviously you can spiral it and layer it and go in all different directions. But I think that's the nuance, and that's the hardest thing to do, is take something complicated, a new idea, and get it onto a piece of paper on one page that you can give it to somebody without saying a word. Say, read this, and then say, tell me, what is that? Don't say a word. Just say, what is this thing? And if that person uses the words that you would use to describe your thing, boom, you know what your idea is, how you're going to execute it. If they say something completely different, then you've got some work to do to reframe how you're explaining it or kind of what it is.
Which, by the way, while a 30-page business plan is important, right, to really nail the nitty-gritty of what you're going to do, in the early phases, in particular, if you're trying to raise capital, your initial conversations with investors, while that's going to center around a pitch deck, if you can show them a one-page business model, right, and particularly if there's some, if it's an infographic sort of a thing, right, that's going to make a whole lot more sense. And certainly, they're, rather than spending time reading 30 pages, if they can get it in one page and just a couple of minutes, right, and even if you don't have to tell them what it's all about, if that one page tells them what it's all about and they understand it and they see the vision, you're likely far better off and far more likely to land an investment from somebody. So a couple of extra minutes here, Ashley. Any final parting thoughts before we wrap up today?
Well, hopefully this was encouraging, not demotivating. I think it's a hard enough, risky enough thing, to kind of go out by yourself and try and prove something or create something. But that's what the economy is made of, right? The economy is made of people taking a risk and being great at something and building something around themselves. And you get a lot of reward from doing that. There are communities. Obviously, Earl is an amazing man and father and role model here, and kind of being an entrepreneur. There's resources around you. Make sure you reach out to those, tap into those, and go for it. I think you will learn so much. And failure, I always say, it's the journey, not the destination, right? So it's failure is not it. It's just that's the step, and you learn way more from failure. In fact, I've had 3 billionaire sons work for me on previous of my businesses, and each of the billionaire fathers did different things for their sons. One gave them nothing, like, you're getting nothing, it's all going to charity or whatever. One gave them everything, and one was in the middle, was kind of reasonable. but irrespective, each of those, men at the time they were working for me had sort of, struggled with that sense of kind of success and sort of following in that sort of footsteps. So, give it a go, try it. But failure doesn't, shouldn't make you less of a person and less of a whatever. You don't have to achieve, necessarily what your father achieved or whatever. It's like, making the step and that first step, and you can take those skills somewhere else if it doesn't work out. They're valuable skills to have. So
yeah,
now's the time.
That's part of that process of getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, as an entrepreneur, you're going to fail over and over and over. You're going to fail far more often than you're going to win, and so you just got to get used to getting yourself back up, brushing your knees off, and I mean, Einstein says the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? You have to realize, okay, that didn't work. I need to change something. Maybe it's my mentality, maybe it's my behavior, maybe it's my actions, maybe it's my skill set, maybe it's my knowledge, right? You have to figure out where the gap is. You have to fill that gap and then move on. But you're going to have struggles, and that's just part of the process, and it's okay. Like that, all of us that have reached any measure of success have been through the damn ringer time and time again.
I'm going to leave on one phrase, which is you learn to walk by stop falling over.
There you go. Yeah.
That's how you do it. So you got to keep banging your head a little bit. But it was a real pleasure. Thanks to the audience for joining on whatever social channels you're on, and obviously stay in touch and good luck on your journey. And a real pleasure to be here, Earl.
Ashley, thank you so much for giving us this hour. Just quickly again, thank you for everybody who joined us this hour. A reminder that we've got Peter Bookman, CEO of Guard Dog, on November 11th, and then Josh Pitts, CEO of Shred Media, and Rob Harder, Executive Director of the Christian Center in Park City, that will be joining us on upcoming segments of TechBeat here. So we'll see you all in a few weeks. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thank you, Ashley.
Take care, everybody.
Signing off.
Bye-bye.